evening and welcome to The Rundown. I'm Megan Roberts. What started out as peaceful protesting in November has turned into escalated tension and fear that violence will rip through the country. The Ukraine has mobilized their military after Russia has put troops within their borders of the Ukraine. The United States estimates there are 6,000 Russian ground and naval forces in the Crimean Peninsula region. CNN's April Williams has more on the escalating tensions in the Ukraine and the United States response.
The Ukrainian military is on its highest alert as Russian forces surround 3 military bases in the strategic Crimean Peninsula, prompting fears an armed conflict could break out at any moment. This video shows a Ukrainian Coast Guard base in Crimea. Uniformed gunmen can be seen, but with no identifiable insignia, who they are or where they're from is still unclear. The majority of Crimeans are ethnic Russian, and Moscow keeps a naval base there. While many there are welcoming the Russians, Ukraine's interim prime minister has another message from Moscow.
This is actually the declaration of war to my country. And we urge President Putin to pull back his military.
But Russia says they're only trying to protect their interests in the region. This has many Western nations on edge. Speaking on NBC's Meet the Press, Secretary of State John Kerry called it, quote, an incredible action of aggression and threatened very serious economic consequences.
He is not going to have a Sochi G8. He may not even remain in the G8 if this continues. He may find himself with asset freezes on Russian business.
Economic pressure may not be enough. Ukraine's ambassador to the UN says his country needs more than diplomatic assistance. He wants military support. But NATO doesn't support that.
We urge both parties to immediately seek a peaceful resolution through dialogue.
So far, Canada has recalled its ambassador to Moscow, and the United States and Great Britain say they are suspending participation in meetings ahead of the upcoming G8 summit. I'm April Williams, reporting.
The office of the German Chancellor has announced that Russian President Vladimir Putin has accepted a proposal to establish a fact-finding mission to the Ukraine and to start political dialogue. Spokesperson for the Crimean Peninsula, Vladislav Seleznyov, said Russian troops had blocked access to bases in the Crimean Peninsula, but added there was no open confrontation between Russian and Ukrainian military forces in Crimea. He added that Ukrainian troops continue to protect and serve the Ukraine. In Brussels, Belgium, NATO ambassadors held an emergency meeting on the Ukraine. NATO Secretary General Andres Rasmussen told reporters that Russia's actions constituted a violation of international law. Rasmussen expressed NATO's concern and support for the Ukraine.
We support the rights of the people of Ukraine to determine their own future without outside interference. And we emphasize the need for Ukraine to continue to uphold the democratic rights of all people and ensure that minority rights are protected. Ukraine is our neighbor, and Ukraine is a valued partner for NATO. We urge all parties to urgently continue all efforts to move away from this dangerous situation. In particular, I call on Russia to de-escalate tensions.
Rasmussen also urged both sides to reach a peaceful resolution through diplomatic talks and suggested that international observers from the United Nations should be sent to the Ukraine. Speaking on CBS's program Face the Nation, Secretary of State John Kerry said several foreign powers are looking at economic consequences if Russia does not withdraw its forces.
Russia chose this brazen act of aggression and moved in with its forces on a completely trumped up set of a pretext, claiming that people were threatened. And the fact is that that's not the act of somebody who is strong. That's the act of somebody who is acting out of weakness and out of certain kind of desperation. We hope that Russia will turn this around.
Kerry will arrive in Kyiv on Tuesday. As the world watches the situation unraveling in the Ukraine, many wonder if this will reignite old Cold War tensions. This is perhaps the most dangerous point in Europe's history and the most confrontation that has happened between Russia and the West since the end of the Cold War. President Obama has said he will not use the situations in Syria or the Ukraine to flex any Cold War muscle, and that these situations are about the people in these countries. And President Obama's actions, or arguably inaction, towards Russia is getting some backlash from colleagues on Capitol Hill. Take a listen to what Senator Lindsey Graham had to say on CNN's State of the Union.
Well, number one, stop going on television and trying to threaten thugs and dictators. It is not your strong suit. Every time the president goes on national television and threatens Putin or anyone like Putin, everybody's eyes roll, including mine. We have a weak and indecisive president that invites aggression. President Obama needs to do something. How about this? Suspend Russian membership in the G8 and the G20 at least for a year, starting right now, and for every day they stay in the Crimea, add to the suspension. Do something.
Well, we are going to take a quick break here on the Rundown. Stay tuned.
Blue,
All right,
42,
wake up.
hike!
Come on in.
Every now and then, Dan likes to take it a little too far. But hey, the show's all about competition, so we'll take it.
Stupid Dan with stupid football and stupid running.
I'm RJ.
I'm DJ.
Oh wait,
Is that right?
we have a show coming.
It's on Wednesdays at 11:30, and you should watch it.
You better watch it.
You better.
Wait, I'm DJ.
Honey, the credit fairy doesn't exist.
What?
It's make-believe. Nobody left anything under your pillow.
If there's no credit fairy, then we'll make our credit score go up.
We will, by doing things like paying our bills on time.
There's no magic to improving your credit, but there's help, and it's free. Go to creditfairy.org.
What?
Good evening and welcome back. Continuing in the Ukraine, a growing crisis and fears of a military intervention by Moscow. The U.S. believes that military forces that have landed in Crimea are Russian. U.S. President Obama made an unscheduled announcement more than 2 hours ago and issued a stern warning to the Kremlin. CNN's Diana Magny brings us the report from Simonpur.
Grey, wet, grim. Not much to see airside at this landing strip, which just became global news. We've just arrived at the airport at Simferopol. This is where overnight a group of armed men, reportedly calling themselves the People's Militia of Crimea, started patrolling the airport. So we're here now. We'll see what's going on. But these men seem far more organized than a People's Militia. Camouflage gear and Kalashnikovs, and otherwise impossible to identify. Balaclavas had their origin in Crimea in the long-ago Crimean War. Now, these balaclavaed gunmen stoke fears of fresh conflict on this small Black Sea peninsula.
Can we ask you guys where you're from? Are you from? You from Russia?
No military insignia on their uniforms, no number plates on their trucks. On Thursday, other gunmen stormed Crimea's regional parliament, inviting in pro-Russian MPs who sacked the premier in favour of a new pro-Russian leader. It's a strange symbiosis which seems to be playing out here too. In front of these gunmen, a line of locals wearing the Georgian ribbon, a well-known symbol of Russian military valour. They say they're here to keep the peace, that they don't know who the gunmen are. We don't have political contact with them, this man tells me, just on a casual basis. Cigarettes and tea. We don't know which country they belong to. Russia says it's not them, that their Black Sea fleet have not strayed beyond their bases in Sevastopol. But on Friday, Crimean channel ART aired video which appears to show Russian helicopters heading to Sevastopol's Belbek airport, adding fuel to Kiev's fears that Russia is invading its territory and prompting it to close Crimean airspace. Whoever these men are, this is clearly a dangerous image to be presenting to the world. Armed gunmen patrolling alongside pro-Russian self-defense units in a part of Ukraine which has a heavy Russian military presence. Ukraine's new government says that this is an occupation. This whilst Russia conducts huge military exercises on this country's borders. Diana Magne, Simferopol, Ukraine.
Joining me tonight to talk about the situation in the Ukraine is WTOP's political analyst Rob Hackford. Rob, first of all, what has your reaction been as to what's been unraveling in the Ukraine?
Well, I definitely feel, as people have been saying, it's definitely Cold War era-esque. It's been drastic tensions for everybody, and I really feel that President Obama really needs to speak up on this issue because recently he's just had no standpoint at all on the current situation.
And speaking of President Obama, he's starting to speak out a little bit on what his plans are to address Vladimir Putin in this whole chaos that is happening in the Ukraine. What have your interpretations been about what he's said, and how do you feel about his leadership abilities going into this?
Well, with his leadership abilities, I think he needs to take a little bit more leadership, actually. I know with the recent cuts in defense budget with Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel, it'll be interesting to see if troops actually from the United States enter the area. I think that might be a little bit drastic, but starting off with Putin and just some political discussion with him will hopefully ease the tensions. I mean, it's a ridiculous situation, I feel.
And it has been very, very high tense, but do you think that he's kind of waiting to see how Vladimir Putin handles this? I mean, if he doesn't have to intervene, do you think it's necessary for him to still try to put his say in?
I think with the economic sanctions that they're currently looking at, that'll be a nice first step. But from there on, I don't currently see any other issue coming up. I think the economic sanctions will be enough to stop Putin with whatever he's trying to accomplish with this, because currently the entire world, as well as NATO and, the UN, it seems like they're going nowhere.
Well, we did see Vladimir Putin and President Obama work together in regards to the situation in Syria. And it seems that their resolution worked as we've come a couple months out of that. They were able to get the chemical weapons out of Syria. So do you think that they'll be able to work out an agreement like what we saw in Syria in regards to the Ukraine?
I definitely think a conclusion will come to this, but hopefully sooner rather than later, because with forces in Russia, in Ukraine, it's a little bit more iffy than Syria. No actual forces were ever entered into Syria. So with actual military action, it'll be slightly different and definitely a lot more drastic of a conversation, I'd say, between Putin and Obama. Some words will definitely be fired back and forth on that note.
Do you think that Russia and therefore Vladimir Putin have more involved and more at stake in regards to the Ukraine than they did with Syria? So therefore we might see different negotiations and a different strategy unravel as far as this.
I definitely think so. With past USSR establishments in Ukraine, it is like an old buddy, basically. They're looking to hang on to their old pal, but politically wise, Putin really shouldn't be worried about what's going on in Ukraine. It's a separate country at this point, and Russia really needs to step back at this point. They're really just putting way too much effort into this situation. They need to back down, in my opinion.
Besides economic sanctions, do you see the U.S. taking any military action?
I do not see that currently, but it's all up in the air pretty much at this point with the defense cuts, as I said. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel will probably be pretty lenient if he does end up sending troops in there, but with the cutback, it'll look like he's kind of two-faced on this issue. After removing troops from Afghanistan, just going back in and saying, oh, we're actually just going to send you to Ukraine instead, it might be a little iffy. So I don't think any actual troops will be deployed. The economic sanctions should be enough at this point, but with further interaction in Ukraine and further violence, it might be a necessary action. Further down the line, though, no action like that should occur in a recent amount of time.
All right, well, I want to thank Rob for his analysis on that, and Rob will be joining me later in the show to talk about some diplomatic issues going on right here in the United States, but for right now, we're going to take a quick break.
I can't. My parents say I have to be home right after work. That's so gay. Totally gay.
Ugh, that is so Emma and Julia.
Why are you saying that's so Emma and Julia?
Well, you know, when something is dumb or stupid, you say that's so Emma and Julia.
Who says that?
Everyone.
Imagine if who you are were used as an insult. When you say that's so gay, do you realize what you say? Knock it off.
Every year, mothers lose their babies to gun crimes. You'll always be your mother's baby. So before you commit a gun crime, think about who you'll leave behind. Gun crimes hit home.
Welcome back to the Rundown. As the turmoil in the Ukraine continues to captivate the world's attention, another country going through a revolution is seeing major changes. Egypt's prime minister surprised members of his cabinet on Monday by abruptly announcing the resignation of the military-backed government. The government had struggled to manage the country over 7 months of political unrest and growing criticism of its performance. The Prime Minister Hazam al-Bemlawi did not give any reasons for the decision or explain its timing. There was speculation, however, that it was somehow intended to clear the way for Field Marshal Abdul Fattah al-Sisi, Egypt's defense minister, to announce his candidacy in the coming presidential election. Joining me tonight to discuss the ongoings in Egypt and how it relates to the Ukraine and what's also happening in Syria is political science major Sam Christensen. Sam, thanks for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Well, first I want to talk about any similarities that you might find between the movements that we've seen happening in Syria last year and also going into this year, as well as what's been happening in the Ukraine, as to what happened in Egypt in 2011 with their revolution, overthrowing President Mubarak, putting in President Morsi. Do you see anything that's, relatively similar between these types of movements?
Well, I definitely see some dissatisfaction with the government because in Ukraine, how the Ukraine government denied action with the European Union and then a dictatorship in both Egypt and Syria. I think civilians and protesters there are very dissatisfied with their government. They want to bring in change for a more democratic government.
As far as Egypt, we've been seeing this unravel since 2011, and it seems every time that they make some headway, something else is happening and they fall a step back. Do you have any suspicion or reasoning as to why that might be?
I just think a lot of it's because they're dissatisfied with what's happening. Like first Mubarak was in, he had a regime, he had a very dictatorship government. Then the army stepped in for a time, and they said it was going to be more democratic, and it wasn't. And then when it finally was democratic, they elected Morsi, who was Muslim Brotherhood, and tried to actually enacted himself as what people called next pharaoh, and very constitution based on Muslim and Muslim Brotherhood actions, and they were upset with that. So I think there's a lot of just dissatisfaction with dictatorship governments there, and that's why they keep having protests about it.
What steps do you think these revolutionaries have to take in regards to installing a government that they will be happy with, that will start to rebuild Egypt into a prosperous nation?
And they need to enact governments that are for the people, because when you have Mubarak's old regime and the Muslim Brotherhood parties that are both very prominent, they have nothing down the middle, which is what the protesters want. They want more of a democratic republic-esque party to take control, and they can't mobilize that because they have no power, whereas Mubarak's old regime and the Muslim Brotherhood just have all the powers to mobilize and win those elections.
What role do you see the religion of Islam playing in Egypt? The Muslim Brotherhood is, of course, pro-Islamic state. A lot of the revolutionaries want a secular state. So what role, how do you see them handling this? You have people who practice the religion, who are Jewish, who are Christian, who are also Muslim, and when you have people of multiple religions living in an area, how do you handle that? It doesn't seem possible to have an Islamic state when you have people of different religions living in the same area, but how do they work with the Muslim Brotherhood and people who might be pro-Islamic state in regards to figuring out what Egypt is going to be?
I think they have to look at Tunisia. When Tunisia got their first democratic government, the secular protesters were very surprised that the 42% of parliament was Muslim, and both sides had a compromise, and while neither of them walked away exactly the most happy, they compromised for the betterment of their people. And I think that's what Egypt has to do to continue.
Kind of give me a timeline here. So we see that the Prime Minister has stepped down. Many suspect that this is to open up the candidacy for president with the upcoming elections. Do you see this time around with the presidential elections, do you think that this will be it for Egypt? Do you think that they will have a successful election period and hopefully start to rebuild their government?
I think one can hope that, but, well, they have to give, they gave Morsi time, and in that time he created a constitution which favored his rule and the Muslim Brotherhood rule. And I think that's with any government they put in, they have to give it some time to see where it goes, and hopefully it does it for the people.
In regards to their constitution, do you think that they will remake the constitution come these elections?
I definitely think so. With the government crackdown on the Muslim Brotherhood and just dissatisfaction with the Muslim Brotherhood in general, they have to change their constitution or else it's not going to work.
All right, well, I want to thank Sam for joining me tonight to talk about this ongoing issue in Egypt. Sam, thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me.
We are going to take one last break. Stay with us. You're watching The Rundown.
Hey guys, this is my teenage friend Rachel. She's cool.
Hey. Hey, could you watch the road?
Hey, could you watch the road?
Okay. All right, well, if we die in a car crash, I want to donate my eyes to my neighbor Gary. He has a boat and he sails all around the world. I would love to see that. I don't know if he actually needs eyes, but who would turn down a free pair of eyes, right? Who's that rich?
Learn your lesson.
Hey guys, this is my teenage friend Fred.
Rad! Hey pal, you want to pay attention to the road?
Relax, man, I got it.
Look, my man, if your bad driving gets me killed, you better hope you die too, or I will haunt you silly. And I'm not just gonna float over your bed like, woo! I'm gonna be making a more annoying noise, like, ah! And instead of wearing those long white robes, I think I'll wear something more form-fitting and upsetting. The other ghosts will look and be like, wow, we've never seen that before.
Welcome back. Well, back here over in the United States, striving to show momentum on a top legislative priority, President Barack Obama is appearing next week with Northeastern governors who back his push to raise the federal minimum wage to $10.10 an hour. A higher minimum wage and an overhaul of immigration laws are Obama's priorities, but it remains doubtful whether lawmakers will send him either piece of legislation this year, particularly when the entire House and 1/3 of the Senate are up for re-election. Obama recently used his executive power to enact a $10.10 minimum wage for the few 100,000 people who work on federal contracts. Joining me once again tonight is WTOP's political analyst Rob Hackford. Rob, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So what are your opinions? You also follow the economy, and I believe you are an economy major, minor?
No, not actually, but I'm just a fan of
Okay,
economics in general, so
okay.
like to keep track of my money, of course.
So you follow the economy. How do you see this if we were to raise the minimum wage to $10.10? How do you see this affecting the economy?
Well, with relationships between unemployment and the minimum wage, as well as inflation, with raising the minimum wage, just like graphically speaking and through normal conceptual ideas from economics, it would actually raise the unemployment rate, unfortunately, because smaller businesses will be forced to lay off individuals because they can't, unfortunately, hire or sustain the workforce that they have at the higher wage. So that is a negative to the having the higher minimum wage. But then also with inflation, raising the minimum wage decreases the value of the dollar. You're going to need more to buy. You're going to need more money, more American dollars to buy less items actually. So for the most part, it's not going to have that much of a positive effect. But what Obama is really seeking with this is to redistribute some wealth. With this, he's going to be able to give more wealth to lower class individuals, and actually about 50% of the country will be affected by this. 50% of individuals that are affected by this are individuals like myself, 16 to 24-year-olds, and then the other 50% is from 16, I believe, to from 25 to 34. So it's going to have a large, wide-sweeping effect on the country.
Rob, do you feel that the minimum wage should be raised at all? I mean, Republicans are talking about keeping it at $7.25, but that is well below what it costs, the average cost of living for Americans. So do you think that it needs to be raised at all? I mean, New York State just raised theirs to $8 an hour. Should we move that needle one bit?
I definitely think we should move the needle, May, but I think 10-10 by 2015 is what the proposed bill is a little drastic. I think Congress is going to spit out a bill that's around $9. I think that's a pretty reasonable number, and it won't cause the shock that 10-10 would cause. With how inflation has been, the minimum wage should be around $13 currently, but with drastically increasing it by $3 or around the $3 that's proposed, it's going to cause a shock in the economy. And basically, as Janet Yellen of the Federal Reserve said, it's going to decrease jobs by about 500,000. So there's going to be a loss of 500,000 jobs, which really isn't looking good for President Obama in that aspect.
No, and of course Republicans have been going after him about not producing more jobs for the economy. What do you think he needs to do in order to get more jobs into the economy and get more Americans back to work?
Well, I'd say if this law is to pass in Congress, President Obama needs to have an ace in his back pocket. He needs to find 200,000 jobs or 300,000 jobs and put them to work right when this bill, if it does pass, when it goes into effect, because otherwise it's just going to cause his unemployment rate, which he's worked so hard to get to 6.6% currently, it's just going to cause that to increase and go back to about pre-Bush era.
All right, well, I want to thank Rob for joining me on The Rundown tonight. That is going to do it for us here tonight. On behalf of everyone at The Rundown and everyone here at WTOP, have a great night.